roll right in to Steve and his presentation on preparing for end of life. Steve, let me know if you need any help sharing screen there, but it should.
Okay.
You got it.
All right. Very good. I love it when I can make technology work. It's bad enough when it isn't working, but all right. So I really thank you for your interest in this topic. The topic is not an everyday topic, preparing for end of life. What you see on the screen is a poem from a source I just came across. I'd never seen it before, from an ancient Celtic text, apropos called The Book of the Dead. It expresses this poem from it expresses my current thoughts on the end of life journey. What will follow is informed by my current experience. That's why I'm calling it an insider's view. I have acute myeloid leukemia, which I think I've shared here intermittently when I've been a fickle member. I had to step back recently due to some medical things, but still around. I had a bone marrow transplant in February of 23, and I have a poor prognosis, as they term it. Since then, I've acquired chronic graft versus host disease. I'm sure some of you are very familiar. And very recently, two other things started with angina, and it turned in. And yeah, you've got some blockages, but we don't want to stent you because of your other treatments. And then a week and a half ago, my pancreas stopped, which sometimes can happen after long-term steroids. And so I'm on a multi-daily insulin injection regime 4 times a day, which just from a change of habits is pretty significant. I hope to get to some of the automatic things over time. Hopefully, some months or a year or two out, my pancreas, if we get to stop the treatments for graft versus host, will come back. So you put all of that together and you say, well, Steve, you really ought to make some plans. So this is an insider's view. And in terms of me, I'm very active with the hospice as a volunteer, have been for 10 years. And I play piano at the hospital. I have 5 gigs per week. One of them is on Zoom for people that can't be around, and the other 4 are at the hospice IPU, and on the 10th floor, more recently, the hemonc and bone marrow transplant floors. I play there 2 different gigs on Friday. Those are the people that took care of me for over 3 months. So my chance to give back. So why? Why would we focus on this? Well, let's compare for a moment. For childbirth, all of us, those of us that don't give birth, know a lot about childbirth because we hear about it. It is a narrative we're familiar with. When somebody says to us, I'm in my 2nd trimester, or so-and-so is perhaps having a breech birth, or later on, and we just had a niece give birth. She started with being 1 centimeter dilated. I knew what all of those things meant. And moreover, having attended classes and listened to people who've given birth or their family have given birth, when I actually attended the birth of my children, I was not shocked, even though that's a place you only see those things, right, is when someone's being born. There's actually quite a lot of blood involved. There's anesthetics, there's doctors, there's nurses, there's IVs, there's fluids, there's all kinds of things going on there that if we walked in never having heard about the topic, we would be shocked. And that actually describes what happens when somebody who doesn't know and hasn't experienced the death of a loved one walks in. Because they've never been told much about it, they've not been to any death classes or become acquainted with it due to narrative that's out there that's being talked about, so-and-so just died, here's what happened. The things that we do about being born and the stories we tell, they get socialized. Whereas for death, we don't do that, generally speaking. And so people are shocked, and I've seen it over and over and over at the hospice. And you really have to take them aside. And the other thing that causes this is that they don't see the doctors and nurses involved until then. Whereas for childbirth, there's a whole thing happening that some people are aware of. So anyway, the concept here that I'm beating the drum about, which I posed to you as a question, perhaps for your action later to think about, is should we have a project to educate? So how do people die? Well, this pie chart kind of gets adjusted year to year and so forth. You see different versions of it, but basically it's always this picture, which is that about a third have frailty. They have dementia and they decline having Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, other those kinds of things, and frailty, simple frailty, things start stopping. Another third have organ failure. So this is heart, liver, kidney, pancreas, anything, and variations under there. And another third have cancer, which is a growing piece of the pie. That's my piece. So now I know something about my probable story. And then only 3 or 4% of people die suddenly, which, if you ask any of us, how do you want to die? The first answer we usually have is suddenly in my sleep. But the problem is here that only 3 or 4% get to experience that. The rest of us have a story. So becoming acquainted with these stories, two things. One is we can do more to support the people who are living one of these stories toward the end of their life. And the other is for ourselves, we can think about how do we want it to go when it gets here. And if you know something about where you're headed here or possibilities, there's all kind of education starting to be available, especially on YouTube and Instagram. There's all these hospice podcasts and so forth, but not enough formal, not enough being socialized. Most of us either due to the illness that we get, we could be young, or old, will experience frailty, and we will need help eventually in activities of daily living because of that, right? So what happens is, and we see it in a weakness, growing weakness, slowness in gait, low level of physical activity, self-reported exhaustion, fatigue is the word, and unintended weight loss is a key signal here. And it results in some of the things you see on the right. Ever get that question when you go in to do, have you fallen in the last 3 months? Because that's an indicator. Injuries, acute illnesses, hospitalizations, these kinds of things can increase. And the thing about frailty is that it's how we react to everything that determines a lot about the course of our final days. So for people who are resilient, and I'm here right now, and I hear this from my team often, Steve, you're amazingly resilient. Just keep on. And I work at it, being fit and so on. But at some point, I probably and others are already at person B, which is a big thing happens to them and they take a big hit, but they can climb back up the curve. They won't be where they were, but they'll climb back up and be somewhat resilient. There are classes of people where this happens, certain illnesses, vascular dementia comes to mind because if they have a significant event, a big TIA, they may come back after a time. For a time, they may be mumbling, not understandable, have aphasia, you have lots of difficulties, and then you find, well, it comes back, you know. So there are lots of illnesses like that. And but eventually you get to person number C, who has a big stressor and does not essentially recover. The one that we've all heard so often is grandma fell and broke her hip, right? And that is a line that can indicate quite a significant cascade of decline that from which they don't recover. A couple, 3 months later, they're gone. So anyway, these three categories are really helpful in understanding end of life and what's going on with any one particular person, because it makes a terrific difference where they are on the curve. And then that's a medical statement. From a psychosocial standpoint, once we recognize that the time of our departure or the departure of Aunt Susie, whoever it is, has arrived, and that is a direct quote, time of my departure, you may recognize it from St. Paul, a very, very famous quote outside of the Bible and religion and so forth. It's down in the lower left. But this is a time to address unfinished business, to be thankful for life, family, and friends, and express that, to take stock of what life has taught us and our spirits, to gratefully live, love, grow, and still learn. And a big one is to accept that pain is a valid life experience. I put down lower left the Greek famous Aeschylus, playwright, so forth, wrote, even in our sleep, pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. So in my 10 years of being around hospice, I have seen people who react poorly to pain, because pain goes with most of the things that are happening. Happily, there are many painkillers that our professionals and many of you administer to help. But there are also people who make of pain something that they can learn from, that they can tolerate better. And these are remarkable people, in my experience, who are capable of articulating the most amazing and wise things. It's just one of those things about the end stretch that's unique. This is a time to be guided by others and set your ego aside. I've had big challenges that way. It's been good for me. To be patient, to be mindful of this moment, this day, and to be joyful. And it's also a time to light a path for those that follow, because there are things that you can do to do that if you're so inclined. There is a narrative for the end of life process. It's just that we're not learning it. It's not codified as well as the one for birth. But there are some key things. This is just a very, very top level. Those of you that are familiar, there's a great depth, many more points than this. But one of the first things that we may notice in some months before someone passes is that they are turning inward. Their thought processes, the recounting of memories, and sometimes a shift in which memories, people who have gone before them. And there can be some grumpiness that comes in this phase. Even somebody who's already a grumpy old person can really kind of amp it up on occasion. There are a number of medical issues, typically increasing in numbers. Some of those are emergent, end up at the ED. They are sleeping more and eating less. And this is when you can see weight loss that's not explainable by some other reason. A large percentage of people experience visioning. So this is in the 1 to 3 months from death usually. And these people see, often will say, I just saw Aunt Susie. Well, Aunt Susie's been dead for 25 years, right? Or vivid memories of Aunt Susie. They're visioning, and it is a pleasurable thing. So it's never unpleasant. And so when somebody reports that this is happening to them and they're like smiling and saying, I saw, or I talked to, or I'm thinking about, and they used to say this, visioning is a very pleasurable thing for the person approaching their end. And that's one of the differentiations between other things that can happen, is it's very pleasurable. Toward the end weeks, the body begins a shutdown sequence, somewhat obvious. There's variations typically happening in vital signs, and people will remark at this point in time, oh, they don't look good. They don't look good at all. They're pasty. There's something off here. And then still further down the line, people hit a transition phase at the beginning of which they can be in and out of consciousness. I witnessed this very recently up at Duke with somebody who was intermittently in and out. When he was out, the eyes were almost closed, and but then he would perk up and ask a question, or have something to say, and interact. So very typical kind of thing to happen. I think of that phase when they are really not there and they have kind of an uncanny valley look in their eyes. A stare is that somebody, I think they are, essentially you could describe it as crossing the veil. They've got 1 foot in the next life and 1 foot here, and they're back and forth. That's kind of the way it feels. And in fact, when you get to the last days after transition and at the end of transition, eyes go kind of half-mast, not focused. Breathing is changing. Not everybody exhibits the more famous Cheyne-Stokes pattern, but breathing is definitely changing. Sometimes there are these long pauses that you're like, oh, and Susie's gone, and then big breath and they're back. And then at a point that the nurses that are attending are pretty good at calling this within a few hours, but death comes and they stop breathing. So there's lots and lots of detail underneath this, but my point is a simple one, which is when you expand this out to the full list of medical signs and indications that we actually are quite aware of, it's a process, and we could be acquainting people with it so that they don't experience this shock at the end. So if there is time, hospice helps with the pain aspect and with the engagement on the psychological and social levels. And Dr. Rachel Zoffness is my favorite. This is her chart. And the medical side obviously is clear, and the professionals are doing that. But you've got a lot of other players in palliative care and hospice who can address the psychosocial needs of not just the patient, but their family. And this is very, very helpful, not just in addressing issues that may exist there, but in softening the effect of pain. Because when somebody's preoccupied with important topics, pain takes a back seat, and it actually helps terrifically. Volunteers can do a lot. So I told you I play the piano. I'll just tell you about Mrs. M, only one of these. In brief, she was a Southern Baptist missionary. When she was young, she was 94 when I encountered her, and I took music to see her weekly at Woodland Terrace in Southern Cary and in the memory unit. I always got assigned memory people because I do this thing with music and memory. Well, I got a call one day in late November saying that she had had a major event the night before, vascular dementia, was no longer able to verbalize, and was bedridden. I didn't need to go. And I'm like to myself, hearing is the last thing to go. I'm going to take my music and see her. So I did. And I took the Vivaldi Gloria, if any of you know it, a wonderful holiday time piece, and put it on my boombox. And she looked over at me and punched her button and got a nurse who had to get a big orderly, pretty good sized woman, in there, and they moved her into a chair 10 feet across from me. And she was listening to this music. She looked at me and she said, I played that many times. And so she was suddenly verbal, which is what music and memory can do with the synapses. And she began narrating her life story as a missionary. When the piece ended, she was done, punched the button, orderlies, and the nurse put her back in bed, fell immediately asleep. I left, and I got a call 2 hours later. She had passed. But that was a time of joy for her, clearly. And when I told her family about it, they were ecstatic. They couldn't hear enough about what had happened there. So my point is that the volunteers and staff of especially hospice, but palliative care as well, can deliver a joyful antidote to the pain and problems of dying. It's a wonderful thing. So let's see. Here's a brief differentiation. I wanted to add mine to lots of stuff that's out there, but the point being that palliative care is about symptom management. I have a palliative care provider. I'm ecstatic about the treatment that I've gotten there. They work with the rest of your team. They do not take the lead. So they're supporting and part of the team. But twice, so the teams, and I'm in the blood cancer clinic, who have their basic standards of care for pain management. Twice, I've asked my palliative care provider to weigh in on the topic. She recommended something else both times that was like a godsend to me in terms of the pain I was experiencing. What I was getting already prescribed just wasn't quite there. But this is their specialty, their whole special area. So they're terrific. They're also outstanding listeners. And at Duke, because they differ by agency and by healthcare system, this is not regulated by the feds as is hospice. So palliative care offerings differ greatly by healthcare system. And the one here at Duke is holistic. So when they take you in, they interview you about everything, psychosocial, and they look at your medical and so forth. They can be curative or non-curative. So somebody in palliative care may get better and go home, right? And they can engage in smoothing the ups and downs of especially pain, but other things as well. And they're integrated with your primary team. So hospice care you get when you've got roughly 6 months or so to live. It's not a hard line anymore, but it's an evaluative thing, and it can be extended. I knew a woman who'd been on hospice care for 2.5 years, whose legacy story I helped codify. She just was amazing. But it's non-curative, so we're not talking about curing a hospice patient. We know they're going to die, and we stop curative treatments. Now, things that can be done these days that didn't used to be possible is a blood transfusion, because Aunt Susie wants to be around for Thanksgiving when her family comes in. limited versions of chemo that are addressing symptoms, not the disease, and other meds that we used to think of and did not used to be allowed in hospice are now allowed if they're treating some symptoms that are interfering. And so there's a lot that has changed just in the last few years. Hospice can bring durable medical equipment to the patient's home, hospital beds, the contraptions that you can lift if somebody can't get out of bed and is pretty good sized, that can help lift them out of bed, the walkers, all those kinds of things, free of charge. They can provide volunteers to do nearly anything, just sit there and be quiet and provide respite for the primary caregiver. Very valid reason. Somebody to watch the football games with some man who doesn't have anybody to watch him with. I mean, let your imagination go there. Volunteers are very interested in doing lots of things. So at end of life, I have some strong recommendations. One is to define your 5 wishes. Wish number 1 is, who's going to make decisions for me about my care when I can no longer either decide or articulate what I want. So you got to define a healthcare agent, proxy surrogate. This person makes medical decisions on your behalf as you have articulated them ahead of time. And they are a critical person. They have to be around and be available, because when the doctors and so forth are dealing with something, they're not going to go read a 100-page long thing. You need to have your power of attorney person, your person that knows these things, available. Wish number 2, what kind of medical treatment do I want or don't want? That goes in your living will and potentially in medical orders, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so that's important. Wish number 3, specify how comfortable you want to be. What type of pain management do you want, and potentially what times of day? So if you're a person who wants to be completely awake, don't care too much about the pain, lay off the pain meds. Or if you're a person that says, I don't want to be in pain, zonk me out. And then there's everything in between. There's a scale of 10, right? And there's also time of day considerations. If every day between, I'll make it up, 10 and 3, you're willing to have visitors and visitors are coming, then that's maybe a time zone where you want it lightened up a little bit. So anyway, very important to define that and put it in writing and give it to your primary person so that they can make sure that this happens. In my case, it's going to be in a book that's going to be bedside wherever I am, hopefully at home, or if I'm at the hospice inpatient unit, wherever I am, it's going with me, because I have some specific thoughts there. Have the conversation with everyone that is close to you and means the most to you. That's from the book by Ira Bayek, The 4 Things That Matter Most. Simple formula, very, very powerful. The first is, please forgive me for anything that I ever did that hurt you. And there may be some particular thing, but it's for everything. I have found, because I have had about 90% of the conversations here that I need to have, that almost resolutely people are unwilling to admit on the spot that you ever hurt them. But these can be things you didn't do for them, which they don't tend to think about, or things you did for them. But the conversation is important to have, to tell them that you forgive, them for anything that they ever did to hurt you, me in this case. To thank them for being a part of your life and to let them know that you love them. This is such a powerful conversation to have with anybody you're close to. You don't have to be dying to have it. It is a remarkable zenith opportunity to touch and be touched by someone that means a lot to you. I highly recommend it. I did it because I kind of had to, because it's not something you every day, but I think it could apply almost uniformly. And as I said, it's terrific. Document your treatment preferences. So this is where I want to talk about something that's relatively new. We all know that if you specify nothing, you're probably going to get standard of care kinds of things that happen, including if your heart stops or you have a breathing problem, you can get some really deep treatment that's standard of care because they're trying to save you. So the way to prevent some of those things to happen is to have a legal documented power of attorney for somebody you trust. And then there's one more thing, medical orders. So the state of North Carolina has these codified on specific forms that are specific colors. And you can do this where you specify some of these orders. For example, don't shock me back if my heart stops. I don't want to be intubated. I don't want a breathing machine. If any of those are part of your end state wishes, they can go into this medical order form, and it gets signed by your doctor, a doctor whose care you are under. It travels with you, and it's the equivalent of an order, right? It's a medical order. So is that happens to be with you at the time that one of these things happens to you. They have a medical order that says do not, and it's case closed. There's not going to be much of a discussion. You got to therefore be careful with it and do it when you're certain about it. So anyway, that's a relatively new thing. Plan and organize your end stage support. Who is going to be your care at the end? A lot of people arrive at hospice and just can't believe that it's not hospice. They think if they sign up for hospice, somebody's going to be on site in the bedroom at my house with my loved one from then on. Not true. Not true. You get a nurse a couple of times a week. You get CNAs who come in and help with activities of daily living. All of them will help train you and whoever else you got on how to do the things you need to do, but they don't sit there. They're not there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, you can call a 24/7 nurse line when you're in hospice and get a lot of help, including coming out rather than going to the ER if it's an emergent problem. But they're not hanging out. So this primary caregiver has a big job here. Or, right, move the patient to skilled nursing. And my own personal experience with family members who have gone there is by the end, it was on the order of $10,000 to $12,000 a month to have them there. They did not have an insurance policy to cover it, but they did have some funds. And funds is one of the primary questions here, because if you're hiring people to come in, you may be forking over $5,000 to $6,000 a month at $40 or $50 an hour to have Home Instead or any of the many agencies that provide people park somebody there overnight, for example, bedside. So big question of money, and it is a terrible, terrible thing for people who do not have the money. But there's a chance to plan ahead of time. There's a chance when you're young to buy insurance policies and lots of things. It's something that should be thought about. Make a plan. So, and arrange, speaking of the primary caregiver, it's a role that gets harder and harder instead of easier, because by the end, the patient is totally dependent on them, incontinent, at home, maybe, or elsewhere, in bed, unable to do activities of daily living. And who's in charge? Primary caregiver. So you got to rally some help and support for the primary caregiver. And in terms of friends and community and family, the thing that we need to coach these people to tell them, don't say, let us know if there's anything we can do. Don't do that. Either do or don't do, as Yoda would say. Don't disappear, draw near. If you intend to give support, don't disappear, draw near. There are lines that are effective. What's up? What's up with Steve? What's going on? If you live remotely, mailing cards and gift cards is very effective. If you're local, this is the do part. I'm heading to the store right now. What can I buy you? I'll bring it over. You need a break. I'll come stay with Steve tomorrow for 3 or 4 hours if he can't be by himself. And I've had some time periods where just because of what was going on, this was the case. And I had a couple of my favorite neighbors stop over just in case. And I'm like, I don't need that, but they told me I needed that. It was fun. And the other is, let's go grab a quick lunch. You need a break. Or I am dropping dinner off tomorrow night. It's either this or this. Or I'm dropping a DoorDash or an Uber Eats card on your porch. So the whole thing here is about doing and coaching the people around the primary caregiver, who has such an incredible job that gets harder and harder as time goes on. Document your legacy. There's amazing, amazing things out there, including one called Storyworth. It sends you one question per week to answer about your life. What was your favorite TV show? Or there's a zillion questions, and you can change the questions. One a week, you answer it, and it goes into what becomes a book at the end of 1 year, which they print and send to you. And they can print multiple copies. Not terribly expensive. There are several capabilities just like this. Also, you could write a memoir. There are people who love to write. Delve into the family history, maybe ancestry, that kind of thing. I know somebody's doing that. Photos are really very powerful, gathering those together. Use video. Anyway, and behind this in very fine print is an example of the many questions that can help generate a legacy. Now, our Duke Hospice has just put together a program and a booklet around getting your legacy written or recorded, however you want to do it, with some links to various things, including these services and guidance, with the offer that they'll have a volunteer help if the family needs some help doing that legacy thing. That's just happening as we speak. The thing was finally just got out of Duke graphics after marketing took a look at it, and it's going to be getting provided to on intake for a hospice like within a week or so. So a lot of ways to go at this, but it's a good thing to do to light the path for those that follow. When is the best time to engage palliative or hospice services? So my strongest recommendation here to everyone is far ahead of time. Get a consult. Our Duke Hospice is a person that's outstanding at this, just to talk through how it really works and the decisions that you'll have to make. Where is it provided? Just everything. And they'll happily have a consult. That's their job, one of their jobs. And she's outstanding. Same thing for palliative care, but my consult actually turned into getting a provider. It's when a life-threatening illness requires ongoing care, usually pain management. They will engage or not engage depending on their judgment of whether they can do something for you. If they don't think they can, they will say, no palliative care for you. So, but anyway, they're there. And obviously hospice, we talk about this, started when curative treatment, it no longer provides the quality of life. So there's an equation here that I've adopted, which is at some point, for example, it is extremely likely that I will relapse, like a statistical certainty. The good news is I was supposed to have relapsed on average 4 months ago, and I haven't. But when that happens, then the conversation to have with the providers, the patient and or you, if you're involved, is you ask, how long, what is the treatment? How long will the treatment last? What will be my probable quality of life right after the treatment? And if that's down some, how long is it? How long do I feel bad? And the big question, how much quality time will it add to my life? And the equation, which I've adopted, it's not for everybody, is when that amount of time approaches the answer to question number 2, which is how long will I last if I don't treat this, I don't get the treatment. When those two things approach the same amount of time, I will throw the switch, I can guarantee you, because I've researched this, I've thought about it deeply. And I will say, stop treatment, because all it's going to buy me is chemo and reactions to it and all that kind of thing. So important conversation to have with anybody who's approaching all of this, because in the intensity of the moments where you get asked the question, you need to have thought about it. So arrange your sunset. Best advice I can give. Dying, the actual thing itself, when it happens, should be a valedictory moment. Family and friends, if you want them, let them know ahead of time, I want you around me, right? And they should get grief counseling afterwards. Hospices provide 13 months of grief counseling. They don't charge for it. And it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in Seattle and your loved one passed away at Duke in Durham, North Carolina, you can go to the hospice out there. The nonprofits all do this, and they will give you grief counseling in groups that they hold or one-on-one. Very important for people to be able to deal with the hole in their lives left by a loved one who passed. Make sure that you have specified in particular where your remains are, all the funeral kind of thing, and that you have a person, and you've told everybody, this person right here knows all of my funeral plans. Because what happens very typically is people enter that phase, relatives included, with expectations about what you're going to have. You're going to have a funeral church service. You're going to have, this, that, and the other thing. And then they get the, no, that wasn't really. And then you get a discussion. Well, you need to have somebody whose job it is. They've got your written wishes here, and they're like, nope, what Steve wanted was this. He put it in writing. And that's what we're doing, right? So that's important. And then finally, the thing that I strongly recommend is to make a list. So this is my list. I have some more detailed notes behind this, but it's all the things that we talked about here. And plus a couple of things that I want to mention. One is specifying your visitation, certainly the palliative and hospice consults, getting a therapist. The first thing I did when I got diagnosed in June of 2022 was get a therapist. I still have that therapist weekly, virtually, by the way. It works for me. And it's been outstanding in dealing with just everything. Second thing I want to highlight is reconciliation. Most people, if they think about it, know somebody that was an important part of their story, maybe some years back, from whom they are estranged. So this is a time when you can think about, do I want to reconcile with that person? So I actually have asked a couple people that that I volunteered around who passed eventually, before they passed, who told me that they had just reconciled. The most recent person told me he reconciled with his nephew, and I'd heard about the nephew, um, not in glowing words, but anyway, he had reconciled with the nephew, and I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "I called him up and told him I'm dying and I want to see you before I die," because the guy wouldn't respond to cards, emails, phone calls, anything, uh, texts. But he got that message through to the nephew, and guess what the nephew did? He came. So anyway, there is sometimes a way to accomplish this. I just want to highlight that. In summary, um, this is about preparing for something that happens to a large percentage of us, like 100%, and 96% of us have a story that we would be well served to understand at the end the contour, as well as what it demands of the people around us. Resiliency determines how we respond and how long we carry on at end of life to the stressors that go with whatever our diagnosis is, and to document your end of life wishes. Get closure with the people that matter. Have that the four things that matter most. Have it. Have that conversation. You don't have to say to them, I'm doing the four things that matter most." You can just cover the topics, and it's priceless. And you may want to consider leaving a few breadcrumbs behind in the form of a legacy, and maybe some of the things you've learned to light the path for those that follow. And by all means, use a checklist. So I put in here some sources of information about all of these kinds of things. I can't believe how much is on YouTube these days, but a lot of it's out there. And yeah, I really appreciate your attention here. I thank you. I don't know if you would have any questions for me or not.
Steve, my name is Bob Pearson, and I don't have a question for you, but I do have take a moment of expressing my gratitude for you coming to us today and speaking so openly and refreshingly candid about your personal journey and how you've mapped that to a process that people can look at and equate and hopefully if you're somewhere in that journey where you need to start putting your thoughts together, follow some of the advice and experiences you've shared. Personally, I have a medical history that has suggested to me that I should be aware of some of the process that you've talked about and begin to bring focus to that. Um, it's something that is difficult to stay focused upon just because of the emotions involved with that. But the way you have presented it today has given me a better feeling in heart about how to approach that and how to also have those conversations when it's appropriate with other people, not just the intimate people in your life, but some of the people who may have fallen outside the circle of your life. So I thank you in so many ways for what you've done today.
Oh,
Personally.
thanks, Bob. Thank you for saying that, and it's much appreciated. And yeah, I hope that I hope it helps. I'm glad it's helping you, and it's a little bit of my lighting the pathway because I encountered this stuff, and I'm like, whoa, I never knew this stuff. So I'm trying to socialize some of it, and maybe it'll be a help here and there.
So, Mr. Steve, this is Dora. I work here at Duke, and I've been with this department about 45 days, and your story has just been so moving to me this afternoon. It just brings so much of kind of things that we wouldn't think about, and things that now that I'm saying, when, our own individual life and story, we never we know we're not going to get out of here alive, so we have to, set those steps up, and you have just put it in such a great perspective of how to do that and how to embrace that. And I second, Mr. Roberts' kind of, feedback. It was just so moving and just so how you just kind of checking all your boxes. And just thank you so much for doing that.
You are so welcome, Miss Dora, and I appreciate the fact that you've joined a fine institution.
Yes. Well, I did 11 years at first, and then I had to step away to take care of my parents, and so now I'm back. But it's just so moving your story, and I'm just, I was writing my, own little, notes of, how to, care for people because I have been a caregiver, and it's a lot of work and kind of, those resources and being there for, for your loved ones. So
Hard.
it's the hardest job.
Yeah.
It's the hardest job, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And I know that, I was supposed to be there at that time. So, yeah, but thank you again.
You're so welcome. Kat asked, I think if this is Kat's, what advice do I have for those of us who want to start having these conversations about ourselves, or loved ones that don't want to broach the subject? So I
Like
don't know.
twofold for me, right? Because like my dad already, I had cancer in my 20s and my dad doesn't want to think about that. But also my dad's in his 70s. Like we have to talk about it for either me or for him. But like he still like won't even ask me about my job at Duke because he like doesn't want to talk about like the cancer. So I just wanted to add on to that specific thing because it's kind of twofold. It's about me and my parent, which I think resonates with people caring for parents.
So if you want to warm somebody up, which may open lots of doors, including this topic, I recommend the 4 things that matter most as the conversation that establishes it establishes essentially what we would call an intimate conversation, right? In which the other person, your dad or whoever, is going to open up a little bit and probably be vulnerable. That conversation has that effect on people. And then you could begin to have this conversation. Now, I'll tell you that I've actually used a version of this same presentation that has a lot of my specific wishes in there, like the 5 wishes. I have mine in there. I've used it with my children, my wife, my closest cousins. I've used it with them all, but I had to get them at a point where, and some of them I could just say, I have some important, as you know, I have terminal cancer, and there's some important things I'd like to talk to you about. It's important to me that you're on board what I'm doing here. And I've used the presentation, the actual PowerPoint. And I've not had anybody who walked out or anybody who said, like that. Plenty of them later on are like, I don't want to talk about that right now, but I heard you, So it's a terrific, like all education, it's probably a layered thing and deserves revisiting at some point, but the same way, which is, I'd like to talk to you. You're so important to me. I've made some changes that you need to know about. To set aside the time, because on any given day, most of them don't want to go there. They're just not ready for that conversation.
Well, I think you've modeled some really important phrases for us, and that's, I see you don't want to talk about this. Just let me know you heard me, or it's really important to me. And I think some of those phrases are helpful for me to know, like, okay, we're not going to talk about it now. You heard me, but we won't talk about it now. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure.
Steve, this is Dave Rohde. Michelle sent out, so we could be prepared for this, attachment with your presentation. Do you mind if we share that with some people in our lives?
Please share it, David. And the version that I just showed you was varied a little bit. I moved a couple of the charts around. I can send, if you want it, anybody that wants it, I will send it to Michelle in case you want the latest and greatest. Not much content change, teeny little things, but I moved a couple of charts. Yeah.
Okay. And secondly, Kat, one suggestion is, if I was in your situation with your dad, I might send him this presentation first, have him flip through it. I mean, if that isn't a great way to soften somebody up, who can't mentally deal with it, I think you read through that, and I think it can thaw you a little bit, if you're just not emotionally ready for it, right? It's so well written. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, Steve.
Oh, yeah, David, you're so welcome. One other line, by the way, that I have used, y'all are reminding me, is I'm not planning to go as a statistic like real soon at all. I'm planning to be around here for another 10 years, and I want to update this thing too many times. You won't like it. But I'm planning to be around. I'm going for the long haul, and they're, so far so good. Treatments are improving all the time, and I think we could say that about every treatment for every capability, right? Treatments are happening and coming on board that we never thought of, that may be the miracle solution. So I don't want to focus on leaving before my time gets here. I'd rather focus on having the plan in place in case it happens at any point in the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tell them that, though, but tell them that's going to ease their mind. I'm planning to be around, but I really want to cover this with you. Yeah.
Amanda, you have a question?
Hey, yeah, Amanda here real quick. No, I just want to make a comment, kind of very emotional topic. So I'm kind of glad I'm off camera today. But I wanted to say too, that I sometimes pick up vibes being in our family, my daughter literally being the only one who is going to be available to care for both her aging parents who have been disconnected for 30 years, and her, you can just see the pressure that puts on her. And grandma still hanging around at 97, she being the main person in that lineage as well. I think that it's incumbent upon me, and I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there, and this has been helpful, to ease some of the burden on her by being the one to bring the conversation up and to acknowledge, you may not feel like talking about this. We don't have to do it today, but let's carve out some time and also I think in a space that's comfortable for her. Like, she doesn't like to feel trapped across a dinner table. That will never happen because she can't get away. But maybe if we go for a walk or we're sitting on the beach, so making sure that as an older person who's been seriously ill and has a lot of health challenges, that I kind of usher in a way for her to feel comfortable about saying, no, my mom doesn't want to be resuscitated. She's shared, or whatever my arrangements are for burial and so on and so forth, and just making it easy for her as much as possible. So maybe that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Kat, too. You may want to ask your dad, what are the 4 most important things to him? So that might open the conversation for him to reciprocate. But anyway, those are just
He'll still bring up
my
the
thoughts.
time he had to pick me up from a party when I was 17. He'll still bring that up. He'll bring it up. And that's what I'll lead with. I'll be like, could you forgive me for calling for the cops calling you when I was 17 to pick me up.
I do think to that point that this conversation, with my daughter could go off on so many different tangents, and the way that we already communicate, we talk about 15 things in 10 minutes all the time. So I think having a guideline and a checklist and, a well thought out conversation where you're coming back to those things that you wanted to talk about and not getting off on what happened when you were in ninth grade is still the most important thing on my mind, Teresa, because you did it and you were guilty. I can hear myself doing that, but that's a good point. But anyway, thanks for letting me share. This was a difficult conversation, but
this was I think I just wanted to praise everyone in this moment, that I think it's really cool that we've created a safe space virtually, because it is hard to get to know people in a virtual space. But how cool is it that there's about a dozen people or so on this call, and we're talking about a topic that we don't talk about with people in our home. And I just really want to emphasize that this is it's really cool, and I really appreciate everyone. I appreciate the specific advice about my dad. I think in that conversation I will reveal to him that it was me who spilled the Kool-Aid on his work laptop when I was 8, and it was not the cat that knocked over the Kool-Aid. I have a question, if I may, for the group, and I know we're running short on time, so cut me off if no one has a response or anything. But for Steve and the whole group, I wonder, how young do we start to bring this up? And I'm representing, and I'd love to hear from other people on here that I know represent young adult cancer, diagnosis in your 30s, 40s. I work with teens and young adults at Duke now as my job, and my boss is always asking me, how is it time to bring up end of life with the teens, young adults? And I'm like, we're still kind of talking about like dating, work life with cancer. When do we, at what point, as like a blanket, not of course like individual cases, like we do tailor those, but as a blanket coaching program, when we're talking about coping with cancer and a social, like how soon is too soon to bring this up? Like, would this have freaked people out while they were going through cancer in their 20s, 30s, 40s?
Do you have group work with your kids?
We do, the coaches that we, yeah. And that's where my boss wants to do, should we do a training on, or some sort of group activity, start to talk about it so we can normalize it amongst, because all the coaches in my program have survived cancer in their teens and 20s. So do we normalize it by talking about it amongst coaches? But I don't feel prepared. Maybe I'll invite you to.
Yeah, I'm available to all of you. I'm no further away than a text or an email or whatever to any of you, period. Happy to consult. And yeah, Kat, I think that there's not an age limit. There is a situation limit, which is to have the conversation before it's too late, right? And in a group setting to facilitate it. So similarly to Amanda, who was articulating, and I appreciate your passion around it, Amanda, everybody finds their own way depending on their family, their history, and all that kind of thing. But these are just kind of the basics that could be covered, right? But they can do it their own way, and they also come to it in their own way. So a facilitated group, I think, with young people is kind of the way you want to do it, and so that the level of support is and comfort is there from others for what could otherwise be, for one particular person, super difficult, right? But they'll be carried along. They'll be carried along and buoyed by the others, definitely in a group situation. Yeah.
Dave wrote again real quick. This is such a wonderful document. Is Duke Hospice doing anything like this, utilizing this in any way?
We are going to. They're building a portal of resources, and have told me that this is going to be included as a resource with some pointers to help for patients and families. I just sent it to that person yesterday who wanted to listen to the whole big thing. They may put a short video out there, but the answer is yes.
I also think this ties in really nicely to like the conversations we've had over death over dinner, and how that could impact, and we'll connect with Katrina outside of this to see how close we are. The other thing I did put in the chat is there is something called a death doula, and they actually help people through these sort of active transitions. So maybe not next month, because this can be a heavy topic, right? So maybe if you guys are interested, we're happy, I'm happy to invite her to the committee meeting in about a couple of months to share what a death doula does and how that can help, and the conversations around that as well, if you guys are interested. And I'm sorry I was late, everybody. I had a meeting I had to be at. Okay. Any other questions for Steve? It was an outstanding presentation, Steve.
Oh, thanks, Monica.
All right.
We can minutes that your contact information. I think you said you're fine with us sharing your email with everyone.
Absolutely. So let's see, I've forgotten if I share the screen.
I believe it was on the last page of your presentation.
Yep.
Awesome.
And I'm serious about text, and I'm kind of hard to reach directly by phone, but you can leave a message because I'm always doing something. But texting, I do a lot, and of course, email. Yeah, happy to chat, consult, whatever else, and help as I'm able.
Thank you so much, Steve. All right, is there anything else for the order of for business? Anything? Okay. Well, a big thank you to David who put it on the radar that we had this scheduled on the evening of Valentine's Day. So thank you, David, for helping bring that up so we could facilitate an earlier meeting so people could go enjoy their loved ones.
Welcome.
Yep. And with that, we will see you next month, the second Wednesday of the month, folks. Appreciate you all. Thank you. Have a great Valentine's Day, guys.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks, everyone.
Valentine's Day. Thank you, Steve.
You bet.
Hey, Michelle, could you stay on?
Sure.
Thank you. I think okay. It's just you and I now. Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to recap on the minutes. I was trying to type as fast as I can.
Yeah.
So on the last part where it says recording, on the very, very bottom where it says recording, do I need to put anything there?
Actually, now that you mention it, let me stop the recording here.
Okay.